Alright, what you got there, sir? There we go. There's Roshi. You know, I'm actually pretty surprised that Roshi's TV inside of his house has like nothing dirty on it, but I guess they just didn't want to use resources on that. Baba is definitely gaslighting Yamcha here because I ripped the model and Invisible Man is not there. Like he's literally not here. I think it was all just in Yamcha's head. All right, so in the scene from Dragon Ball Origins 2, there's this like really weird looking, like it's a cool looking effect that happens, and I'm like, sure, but like where is he? And after extracting the model and looking around, I'm like, that's weird, I don't see him. And that's because he is literally like inside of here. And so they do this like zoom in on him. Yeah, so this is kind of the perspective that they're going for. You just zoom out on him, but it looks cool in practice, but just how they did it kind of trips me out. Because I mean, why create a whole nother scene? You already have lead up to Karin's tower, so yeah, that's how they do it. So Dragon Ball Origins is an isometric game, meaning that you're typically looking at it from this perspective where everything needs to be pointing towards the camera. And what that means is that when you move it towards perspective like this, you can kind of see how everything's pointing to theoretically where the camera is at. Something that Dragon Ball Origins 2 likes to do a lot is have the character's eyes pop open when something like crazy happens. This is the grenade that explodes right in front of his face, but if you scale that out of there, his face is regular. What's interesting is that these are like just separate like meshes. Like I can just remove the eyes like this, like the little googly eyes. All right, so in the end credits for Dragon Ball Origins 2, Goku is kind of running an endless loop, and the way that they managed to get this to work is actually Goku's in essentially just like a donut where, you know, this back portion, the sun, doesn't really move, but the stage around it circles. So it gives the impression, this parallax effect, as if Goku's making like some sort of progress, he's moving somewhere, but the background, like the sun, because it's further away, it's not going to move in the same way. So that's kind of like how this parallax effect is happening. But, you know, really creative stage design. This really gives you the impression that, you know, this is a stage play. Oh, and this is something that happens a lot with these like lower poly games. This happens a lot in PlayStation 1 games, but the shadow that you see, like if we're like in this from this perspective, looks like it's just something that's like baked into the ground or something. But in this case, it is a solid mesh that has its own wireframe. It's just squashed down. So that's kind of how they did shadows like this. All right, so this is a moment where Tao Pai Pai is getting blasted by Goku's Kamehameha. And really what I find most interesting about this is just how they managed to do kind of the effect when you're looking at from this perspective, because now you can see when you're in this tunnel, he's perfectly fine, but using the power of transparency and like additive layering, now you can kind of get that effect where it's like blinding and creating this like cool effect on Tao Pai Pai. So something that Dragon Ball Origins likes to do is kind of replicate the comics where, you know, some of the action is highlighted with a scene that's not with the regular background. And kind of how Dragon Ball Origins is doing that is it's moving the characters away from the main scene to set up kind of like this vignette here, where the actual setting is still in the scene. They're just getting spirited away to, you know, this kind of area. And that depends on the scene, but typically this is how it's done. So this is from a scene where Oolong transformed into Bulma is giving Roshi a little bit of a show. And obviously Dragon Ball Origins is rated T for teen, and they don't want to increase the rating by showing, you know, something that even the original manga didn't explicitly show. But they do kind of try to get away with it with this coy little filter where you can kind of get what's going on, but you don't get the full picture. But behind the scenes, essentially what's happening is, you know, Roshi's doing his standard flip out, but then on Bulma's side, it's just her just doing this little dance. So nothing scandalous, but the idea that what's going on behind the scenes is behind curtains is meant to give the impression of what's really going on. All right, so kind of an example of perspective playing a good role and given the proper effect for things. You typically look at Goku's flying Nimbus or Kintoun and think, man, this is like a really fluffy, volumetric kind of cloud that you can sit on that's solid. But the way that it works on the DS is that it's actually comprised of a bunch of layers of relatively flat textures put together so that you're never looking at it from this side, especially when Goku's flying on it. But if you look at it from a wireframe perspective, you can see that it's not really solid. It's just using force perspective to give you the perception that this is what it looks like. Like, it looks very voluminous. And so also the way that the layers in the Flying Nimbus or Kintoun stack are pointing is dependent on like the view that you're looking at. So in this case, we're looking at him from kind of this angle. So if you move it down a little bit, you can see how it's pointing up this way rather than, you know, looking towards where I have the camera perspective now. So here's something that I'm surprised didn't get Dragon Ball Origins 2 up from a rating of teen to rated M, because if you're familiar with Dragon Ball, during the Fortune Teller Baba saga, Yamcha is fighting the Invisible Man, and in order to reveal him, there's this gag where Krillin reveals Bulma's chest, which in the Japanese version of the manga shows it uncensored. In America, it just shows her bra. And Dragon Ball Origins 2 replicates that, and I'm not going to show you that here, but on the DS, like in the official game that was released, what they do is they take advantage of the hinge on the DS so that they're not showing her full chest, but you get the point across. But using methods like this, the 3D screenshots, you can technically get a view of the entire scene without the hinge. And surprisingly, this is modeled out. And why that surprises me is because even though it's not technically in the game proper, it is still in the game's asset. So this was kind of like the same trouble that Grand Theft Auto San Andreas had with the hot coffee mod, where technically, even though you could only access it through illicit means, it's still accessible. And even though, you know, I'm using a 3D screenshot method, which is a new method of, you could still, before this, even back in like 2010, 12, do extraction of textures and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm sure like just people didn't care enough. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is leagues more popular than Dragon Ball Origins 2, but just kind of like surprised by that. So something I think people don't have enough appreciation of is voluminous hair or unique hairstyles in computer graphics. A lot of newer movies right now are coming out and featuring characters with unique hairs, afros, curly hair, that kind of stuff. And that's not just because of increasing diversity, or not just because, but it's also because it's often a chance for computer graphics people to kind of showcase new tech that's able to finally use this. I mean, there is a reason why Monsters Inc. with its hair dynamic for Sully was a big deal. It's not an easy thing to do. And for kinky or afro hair like Ranfan has right here, how would you do that on the DS? Because that's intensive even on like a bigger scale. And this is kind of where like perspective plays an issue, because really, I mean, she's technically, like, you can see her scalp if you're looking from this perspective, but she's made up of, at least her hair, layers of different meshes, thin meshes. So if we slip to solid, you can kind of see how that's comprised, so that when you're looking at it from this perspective, and this perspective changes depending on, you know, where the camera's looking at, it looks like it should. So you're never really down on this level, and that's on purpose. So that's kind of how you do it. Dude, like literally everything in this game has a gun. Like literally, why is there a gun on the wall?